Do you feel a shiver up your spine from fear? Yes, it's another story from the Nightshade diary. You know what that means. Check under the bed and make sure no one or nothing is there. Is the closet door securely shut? Then leave your disbelief behind. Amp up your imagination and hang on tight for another ride into terror and mystery. And like all good horror stories, just imagine it's a dark and stormy night. And remember, screaming like a little girl is permitted. The Ghost of Two Forks by Elmer Kelton. A railroad was often a blessing to early Texas towns, but it could as easily be a curse. Many new towns sprang up and thrived along the rights of ways as track layers moved into new territory eager for improved transportation. But other towns, once prosperous, withered and died because the eastern money counters and the surveyors found another route that bypassed them. Such a town was Two Forks. For years a county seat, its voters had approved a bond issued that built a fine new stone courthouse with a tall cupola that sported a clock face on each of its four sides. From the day its doors first opened for business, it had been Sandy Fuller's job to sweep its floors and keep its brass doorknobs bright and shiny. In winter he kept wood boxes full for the several pot-bellied heaters. All these were tasks he enjoyed, for he had hand-carried many of the stones that went into its building, and he felt he owned a share of it. Most people would say Sandy was not among the brightest members of the community, that his limited skills restricted him to the most menial of tasks. At 50 his back was beginning to bend. Toting all those heavy stones had not been good for his arthritis, either. But whatever his own shortcomings might have been, his 2 Jersey cows gave more milk than any in town, and his 3 dozen laying hens kept much of the community well fixed for eggs. He also kept a dandy little garden, selling much of its produce to his neighbors, giving it to those who could not pay. Those assets, along with his housekeeping job at the courthouse, yielded everything Sandy needed for the good though simple life. He told his cowboy friend Cap Anderson that he hoped it would last all of his days and that heaven would be just like Two Forks. He and Cap had once ridden broncs together in their younger years, until too many falls forced Sandy to find less strenuous work. Cap still held a steady ranch job, though now he rode gentler horses. Everybody in town knew Sandy, but 1,000 miles away in a cloud of cigar smoke at the railroad directors' conference table, decisions were made by men who had never heard of him. All they knew of Two Forks was that it was in the wrong place. The surveyors had marked a route that would miss the town by at least 6 miles. They were about to strike a death blow to the prosperous little community. But that was Two Forks' misfortune, and none of their own. Sandy had every reason to remain where he was, among friends, working in a courthouse he had helped to build. Among other things, he visited the cemetery almost every day, carrying a bucket of water to sprinkle on wildflowers that grew over 2 graves. One tombstone marked the resting place of Ardella Fuller, loving wife and mother. Beneath the shadow of the other, topped by the carved figure of a lamb, lay the infant daughter of Sandy and Ardella. The date of death was the same on both stones. For months, Sandy had heard rumors that the railroad was coming. He shared his neighbors' early enthusiasm, because the shining rails could bring fresh enterprise to the town he loved. Sandy's thin wage might not increase, but it pleased him to think it would be a boon to his friends and neighbors. Meanwhile, he kept the courthouse spotless and clean. It was the town's crowning glory and his own. He paid little attention to whispered rumors that surveyors were placing stakes across the Bar M Ranch far south of town. It seemed unreasonable that the railroad builders would not want to make the fullest use of a promising community like Two Forks. It was already a landmark of sorts, its courthouse clock tower standing proudly 3 stories high. Visible for miles across the open prairie, the striking of the clock was music to Sandy's ears. Not until he heard the county judge talking to 2 of the commissioners did he begin feeling uneasy. He stopped pushing his broom to eavesdrop. The judge said, "I met with the railroad people. They tell me we've got no chance to change their minds. The Bar M offered them the right-of-way cheap because Old Man Mathers figures to sell town lots. The graders are already at work. A commissioner asked, "What kind of a county seat will this be then, 6 miles from the railroad?" Old Man Mathers figures sooner or later we'll have no choice but to move it to his town. "We can't move a stone courthouse, and this one ain't half paid for." "No, but we can be sure Mathers will try to convince the voters to build a new one over on the railroad." The commissioner declared, "He'll play hell doing it. Most of the county's voters live right here in Two Forks." That sounded reasonable to Sandy. He went back to sweeping and put the worry behind him. That night, as he watered the wildflowers on Ardella's grave, he talked to her just as he had talked to her when she was alive. "Don't you be frettin' none, honey. The folks ain't gonna go off and leave a good town like this, especially one with such a pretty courthouse, and it's not paid for yet." But it played out like the judge had said. The graders followed the surveyors, and the rails followed the graders. Old Man Mathers had a crew staking out town lots along the right-of-way. He donated a large town square for the building of a new courthouse. He put up a big new general store and guaranteed that his prices would be lower than those in Two Forks because he could obtain his goods directly from the railroad without the extra cost of freighting them in by wagon. Sandy refused to acknowledge the writing on the wall, even when he stood with Cap Anderson and watched skids being placed beneath the Jones family frame house. He watched a 6-mule team slide the structure across the prairie toward the new town of Mathers. "They'll wish they hadn't moved," he told Cap. "They'll get awful lonesome over there without their old neighbors." But one by one, the old neighbors moved too. House after house made the 6-mile drag to a new site on the railroad or rode over there on a wagon bed, extended in tandem. In time, Two Forks began to look as if a tornado had skipped through, taking out structures at random, leaving behind only cedar post foundations, and falling down sections of yard fence. Weeds grew where flower beds and gardens had been. "Town's not the same anymore," he told Ardella, "but the courthouse ain't changed." He swept every day, for dust from the abandoned lots made it more difficult to keep its floors clean. He polished the doorknobs, and as he could get to them, washed the windows. Cap Anderson sympathized. "You can't blame folks for leaving. They've got families, most of them. They've got to go where they can make a living." Cap lived north of Two Forks. The new town was a hardship for him because it meant he had to travel 6 miles further than when he could do all his business here. Time came when almost the only people still living in Two Forks were those who worked in the courthouse. The judge and his wife, the county clerk, the sheriff, a deputy, the jail keeper, and Sandy. The operator of the last general store loaded his goods on wagons and hauled them to a new building in Mathers. His old place stood vacant. It made Sandy think of a doggy calf. One night some young vandals from the new town sneaked in under the cover of darkness to break out the store's windows, and those of what had been the blacksmith shop. The judge was the first of the courthouse crowd to surrender. He had his big house sawed in two and hauled over to Mathers. Sandy heard that one section was sprung a little during the trip so that the two never fit back together just right. After some loud cussing, the judge grudgingly accepted the patching job, though his wife was never again satisfied with the house. The county clerk was not long in following the judge to Mathers. The sheriff and his crew had to stay because the jail was still in Two Forks, though the lawman spent most of his time enforcing the ordinances in the new town. The few residents remaining in Two Forks were not given to crimes and misdemeanors. The judge became increasingly vocal about the nuisance of living in one town and working in another. Sandy heard his voice ringing down the hall. "There is no longer any question about it. We've got to move the county seat to Mathers." Sandy almost dropped his broom. The sheriff agreed with the judge's opinion, but pointing out that such a move would require a vote of the county citizens. The judge said, "Most of them are in Mathers now. Who is left to vote staying in Two Forks?" As it turned out, the only dissenting votes were Sandy's and those of some farmers and ranch people like Cap, afraid of higher taxes. Sandy listened disconsolately as the ballots were counted in the clerk's office. He quickly saw that his vote was being crushed beneath the weight of all those others. He heard the judge say, "Now, we've got to have a bond vote so we can build a new courthouse." The sheriff was skeptical. "The county still owes 10 years' payments on this one. Do you think the landowners are going to vote another tax burden on themselves?" "The people in town outnumber the country voters," the judge argued. "They're tired of having to come all the way over here to do business with the county government." And so it was. The new citizens of Mathers were overwhelmingly in favor of a new courthouse, especially after the judge pointed out that most of the added tax burden would be levied upon landowners and not themselves. Old Man Mathers was especially pleased. His son-in-law was a builder and a cinch to get the construction contract from the commissioner's court. The stone would be quarried from the south end of the Mathers ranch. It was a foregone conclusion that the price of building stone was going to run high. Watering the flowers, Sandy told Ardella, "It's going to take them a while to get that new courthouse built. I'll bet it won't be nothing like as pretty as this one here." He was right. He sneaked over to Mathers one Sunday afternoon to steal a peek at the construction work. The side of the walls were up and the roof was half built. He took a measure of satisfaction in the fact that this courthouse was going to be but ugly. It offered no imagination in its architecture. No adornments, just four plain, square walls and a row of deep-set windows that reminded him of the eye sockets in a skull. What was more, he had been told that this courthouse was costing twice as much as the older one. They would be held to pay for the judge and some others when the next election rolled around. But that was still more than a year off. From people who came to the old Two Forks courthouse to do business with the county, Sandy heard rumblings of discontent. Cap led a petition drive demanding that the county refuse to accept the new structure on the basis that it was badly designed, shoddily built, and uglier than a mud fence. But the judge ruled that the petition did not represent a large enough percentage of the voters and thus was invalid. Construction was completed and the new courthouse was approved by the Commissioner's Court. The next step was to move the records from the older building. Sandy's hopes soared when a dozen ranchers and their cowboys, including Cap, surrounded the Two Forks courthouse and vowed to stop at gunpoint if necessary any transfer of documents. The judge and the sheriff foiled that attempt by bringing in 2 Texas Rangers to enforce the court order. The ranchers and their cowboys might have gone up against the United States Army, but they knew better than to oppose the Texas Rangers. Sandy and Cap watched crestfallen as the county records were placed in a line of wagons and hauled away. That night he told Ardella, "I don't know what I'm going to do now except for one thing. I ain't leaving you and the baby, and I ain't leaving my courthouse." The judge came to him the next day with a proposition. "You just as well give it up, Sandy, and come over to Mathers. We need a janitor to take care of the new courthouse, like you've taken care of this one." Sandy knew one reason they wanted him was that they could not find anyone else willing to do the job for the same low pay. "No, sir," he said, "I'm satisfied where I'm at." "But there's nothing for you to do here. This courthouse is still here and it needs somebody to care for it." The judge began to show impatience. "Don't you understand? This courthouse is vacant, retired. We don't need anybody to take care of it." "But it still belongs to the county, don't it? We're all still paying for it, ain't we?" "That is beside the point. We can't pay you to sweep out an abandoned building. We will pay you to take care of the new one. One way and another, I reckon I'll get by. If anything ever happens to that new courthouse, you'll be glad you've got this one sitting here waiting for you." The judge shook his head in disgust. A man who would argue with a fool is a fool himself. He turned away but stopped to say, "Your paycheck ends today." Money had never been an important issue with Sandy. He could get by on very little. Between his garden, his chickens, and his milk cows, he would not go hungry. He told the judge, "If you ever need me, you'll know where to look." "Damn it, man, don't you realize that Two Forks is a dead town?" "It ain't dead as long as somebody lives in it. That'll be me." Sandy cooked his meals and slept in a plain frame shack. It would be a stretch of the language to say he actually lived there. He lived in the courthouse. He was accustomed to going there before daylight and making sure it was ready for business. In winter, he built fires and all the stoves to take the chill off before the first of the staff arrived. Now, though, it was summer. He opened windows so a cooling breeze could freshen the air. Everything continued the same as before, with one important difference. No one was in the courthouse except him. With all the desks and chairs removed, the sweeping chore was easier because he did not have to work around the obstacles. The empty rooms looked larger than before. In the county clerk's office, the shelves were bare where once they had been full of records of land transactions, court decisions, marriages, and births and deaths. Sandy did not need the records to help him remember, however. He had been a witness to almost everything that had happened here. Having more time on his hands, he spent longer at the cemetery talking to Ardella. He wiped dust from the carved lamp atop the baby's tombstone. "It's awful quiet here now," he said. "But in a way, I kind of like it. Sometimes I got tired of all that noise, and I don't have a lot of people throwing their trash around. You ought to see how clean the courthouse is." He almost never went to Mathers. The sight of that squatty new courthouse made his eyes hurt. He still bartered enough butter and eggs to trade for the few groceries he needed, mainly coffee and bacon and such. Every 2 or 3 days, Cap or some other rancher or cowboy took his produce to town for him and brought back whatever he ordered from the general store. He had noticed that the new courthouse did not even have lightning rods like the old one. Maybe one day lightning would strike, the building would burn down, and they would have to move the county seat back to Two Forks. The county could not afford to be paying for 3 courthouses at the same time. Well, when it happened, they would find the old one as good as when they had left it. Better even, for Sandy made improvements on it here and there. But lightning did not strike. Time went dragging on. A windstorm took most of the roof from Sandy's shack. He decided to move into the jail, which stood in the shadow of the courthouse. He reasoned that a building always fared better when someone lived in it than when it stood vacant. They would need the jail again someday when they returned to Two Forks. He kept it as clean as the courthouse. One by one, his rancher and cowboy friends died or moved away. Cap remained, but he did not often go to town anymore. No longer could Sandy depend on someone else to carry his butter and eggs to town. He had no choice but to walk the 6 miles to Mathers, carrying his goods in a cloth sack, then walking back with food he could not produce for himself. Most of the townspeople had forgotten about him. Now they talked about him again. He was poor, feeble-minded old Sandy, who didn't have the sense to give up and quit beating a dead horse. He became the ghost of Two Forks, a ragged apparition who showed up briefly on the dirt streets of Mather every 3 or 4 days, said little or nothing to anybody, and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. A few of the more superstitious even suggested that he had died of lonesome and that what they saw was a wraith, a will-o'-the-wisp. Town boys dared each other to visit the Two Forks Cemetery after dark and see if the ghost would appear. He did, on a few occasions. Sandy was as protective of the cemetery as of the courthouse. He was afraid vandals might topple some of the tombstones, especially Ardella's or the baby's. After several town boys hurried home, shaking with fright, talking about the ghost that appeared out of nowhere, the nocturnal visits stopped. Hardly anybody except Sandy came to the cemetery anymore. The few abandoned frame houses gradually succumbed to time and the weather, sinking back to the ground or giving up to the wind, which scattered them in pieces across the old town site. Only the grand old courthouse remained, and the jail. The ghost of Two Forks continued to care for them, to keep up repairs. Then one day a cowboy happened by on his way to town. It was a hot summer day, but the courthouse windows remained closed. Sandy had routinely opened them each morning from spring into late fall. Maybe the old man was ill, the cowboy thought. He rode up to the courthouse and tested the front door. It was locked. He led his horse to the jail and went inside. Sandy was not there. The stove was cold. Sandy's coffee pot sat empty except for yesterday's grounds. Alarmed, the cowboy went outside and called. The only response was the echo of his own voice. A circle through the town site yielded no sign. He rode to town and went directly to the office of the new sheriff. A small delegation of townspeople, mostly older ones who remembered the heyday of Two Forks, accompanied him back to the ghost town. They searched every room, every closet in the old courthouse, half expecting to find Sandy dead in one of them. They even climbed up into the clock tower. They did not find him. "It's just like the wind just lifted him up and carried him away," the cowboy said. Or maybe he wasn't nothing but a ghost to start with, the townsman suggested. Maybe he died when the town died. So now Two Forks was officially dead. The last person to have lived there was gone. The tall old courthouse stood as silent testimony to the town that once had been, and to the man who had stubbornly refused to accept that it was gone. But as Sandy had long predicted, the courthouse did not die. It refused to submit to the wind and the rain and the ravages of time. After many years, some former citizens of Two Forks decided it was time to honor the town's memory with a big reunion. A barbecue and dance were better to have it than in the courthouse. No one knew where to find the keys, if they even existed anymore, so someone had to pick the lock so the committee could go inside and clean up the place for the benefit of the expected crowd. To their amazement, the courthouse was as clean as if it had just been swept. Tight windows, they reasoned, had not let the dust in. There should have been cobwebs, yet they saw none. Even the windows sparkled as if freshly washed. The ghost of Sandy Fuller, some said. He had never given up his job. The state placed a historical marker beside the front door of the old Two Forks courthouse. The reunion and barbecue became an annual affair, and dances were a frequent event. From time to time, the old building pulsed with life as it had long ago. Visitors came often in hope of glimpsing the ghost of Two Forks, but none ever saw him. They knew only that occasionally he still swept the courthouse by night and kept it clean. No one ever knew how Sandy Fuller had disappeared. Well, almost no one. Cap Fuller knew, for he had found Sandy lying dead beside Ardella's grave. Knowing Sandy's love for the courthouse, and knowing the law would not allow it if anyone knew, he secretly buried him in the basement. He kept Sandy's keys. He also kept Sandy's broom until he wore it out and had to replace it with a new one. The Defense of Sentinel by Louise Amour. When the morning came, Finn McGraw awakened into a silent world. His eyes opened to the wide and wondering sky where a solitary cloud wandered reluctantly across the endless blue. At first he did not notice the silence. He had awakened, his mouth tasted like a rain-soaked cat hide. He wanted a drink, and he needed a shave. This was not an unusual situation. He heaved himself to a sitting position, yawned widely, scratching his ribs, and became aware of the silence. No sound, no movement, no rattling of well buckets, no cackling of hens, no slamming of doors. Sentinel was a town of silence. Slowly, his mind filling with wonder, Finn McGraw climbed to his feet. With 50 wasted years behind him, he had believed the world held no more surprises. But Sentinel was empty. Sentinel, where for 6 months Finn McGraw had held the unenvied position of official town drunk. He had been the tramp, the vagabond, the useless, the dirty, dusty, unshaven, whiskey-sodden drunk. He slept in alleys, he slept in barns, wherever he happened to be when he passed out. Finn McGraw was a man without a home, without a job, without a dime, and now he was a man without a town. What can be more pitiful than a townless town drunk? Carefully McGraw got to his feet. The world tipped edgewise, and he balanced delicately and managed to maintain his equilibrium. Negotiating the placing of his feet with extreme caution, he succeeded in crossing the wash and stumbling up the bank on the town side. Again, more apprehensively, he listened. Silence. No smoke rising from chimneys, no barking dogs, no horses. The street lay empty before him like a street in a town of ghosts. Finn McGraw paused and stared at the phenomena. Had he, like Rip Van Winkle, slept for 20 years? Yet he hesitated, for well he knew the extreme lengths that Western men would go for a good practical joke. The thoughts came as a relief. That was it, of course, this was a joke. They had all gotten together to play a joke on him. His footsteps echoed hollowly on the boardwalk. Tentatively he tried the door of the saloon. It gave inward, and he pushed by the inner batwing door and looked around. The odor of stale whiskey mingled with cigar smoke lingered lonesomely in the air. Poker chips and cards were scattered on the table, but there was nobody. Nobody at all. The black bar was lined with bottles. His face brightened. Whiskey. Good whiskey. And his for the taking. At least, if they had deserted him, they had left the whiskey behind. Caution intervened. He walked to the back office and pushed open the door. It creaked on a rusty hinge and gave inward to emptiness. "Hey!" His voice found only an echo for company. "Where is everybody?" No answer. He walked to the door and looked out upon the street. Suddenly a desire for human companionship blossomed into a vast yearning. He rushed outside. He shouted. His voice rang empty in the street against the false-fronted buildings. Wildly he rushed from door to door. The blacksmith shop, the livery stable, the saddle shop, the bootmaker, the general store, the jail, all were empty, deserted. He was alone. Alone. What had happened? Where was everybody? Saloons full of whiskey, stores filled with food, blankets, clothing. All these things had been left unguarded. Half frightened, Finn McGraw made his way to the restaurant. Everything there was it had been left. A meal half eaten on the table, dishes unwashed. But the stove was cold. Aware suddenly of a need for strength that whiskey could not provide, Finn McGraw kindled a fire in the stove. From a huge ham he cut several thick slices. He went out back and rummaged through the nest and found a few scattered eggs. He carried these inside and prepared a meal. With a good breakfast under his belt, he refilled his coffee cup and rummaged around until he found a box of cigars. He struck a match and lighted a good Havana, pocketing several more. Then he leaned back and began to consider the situation. Despite the excellent meal and the cigar, he was uneasy. The heavy silence worried him, and he got caught up and went curiously to the door. Suppose there was something here, something malign and evil? Suppose... Angrily he pushed the door open. He was going to stop supposing. For the first time in his life he had a town full of everything, and he was going to make the most of it. Sauntering carelessly down the empty streets to the elite general store, he entered and coolly began examining the clothing. He found a hand-me-down gray suit and changed his clothes. He selected new boots and donned them, as well as a white cambric shirt, a black string tie, and a new black hat. He pocketed a fine linen handkerchief. Next he lighted another cigar, spat into the brass spittoon, and looked upon life with favor. On his right, as he turned to leave, the store was a long rack of rifles, shotguns, and pistols. Thoughtfully he studied them. In his day, that was 30 years or so ago, he had been a sharpshooter in the army. He got down a Winchester 73, an excellent weapon, and loaded it with 17 bullets. He appropriated a fine pair of Colts, loaded them, and belted them on, filling the loops with cartridges. Taking down a shotgun, he loaded both barrels with buckshot. Then he sauntered down to the saloon, rummaged under the bar, until he came up with Dennis Magoon's excellent Irish whiskey, and poured 3 fingers into a glass. Admiring the brown beautiful color, the somber amber, as he liked to call it, he studied the sunlight through the glass, then tasted it. Ah, now that was something like it. There was a taste of bog in that. He tossed off his drink, then refilled his glass. The town was his, the whole town, full of whiskey, food, clothing, almost everything a man could want. But why? Where was everybody? Thoughtfully he walked outside. The silence held sway. A lonely dust devil danced on the prairie outside of town, and the sun was warm. At the edge of town, he looked out over the prairie toward the mountains. Nothing met his eyes save a vast, unbelievable stretch of grassy plain. His eyes dropped to the dust, and with a kind of shock he remembered that he could read sign. Here were the tracks of a half-dozen rigs, buckboards, wagons, and carts. From the horse tracks all were headed the same direction, east. He scowled, and turning thoughtfully, he walked back to the livery barn. Not a horse remained. Bits of harness were dropped on the ground, a spare saddle. Everything showed evidence of a sudden and hasty departure. An hour later, having made the rounds, Finn McGraw returned to the saloon. He poured another glass of the Irish, lighted another Havana, but now he had a problem. The people of the town had not vanished into thin air. They had made a sudden, frightened, panic-stricken rush to get away from the place. That implied there was, in the town itself, some evil. Finn McGraw tasted the whiskey and looked over his shoulder uncomfortably. He tiptoed to the door, looked one way, then suddenly the other. Nothing unusual met his gaze. He tasted his whiskey again, and then, crawling from the dusty and cobweb convolutions of his brain, long befuddled by alcohol, came realization. Indians. He remembered some talk the night before while he was trying to bum a drink. The latter 5 ranch had been raided and the hands had been murdered. Victoria was on the warpath, burning, killing, maiming. Apaches. The fort was east of here. Some message must have come, some word, and the inhabitants have fled like sheep and left him behind. Like a breath of icy air, he realized that he was alone in the town. There was no means of escape, no place to hide, and the Apaches were coming. Thrusting the bottle of Irish into his pocket, Finn McGraw made a break for the door. Outside, he rushed down to the elite general store. This building was of stone, low and squat, and built for defense, as it had been a trading post and stage station before the town grew up around it. Hastily, he took stock. Moving flour barrels, he rolled them to the door to block it. Atop the barrels, he placed sacks, bales, and boxes. He barred the heavy back door, then blocked the windows. In the center of the floor, he built a circular parapet of more sacks and barrels for a last defense. He got down an armful of shotguns and proceeded to load 10 of them. These he scattered around at various loopholes with a stack of shells by each. Then he loaded several rifles. 3 Spencer 56, a Sharps 50, and 7 Winchester 73s. He loaded a dozen of the Colts and opened boxes of ammunition. Then he lighted another Havana and settled down to wait. The morning was well nigh gone. There was food enough in the store, and the position was a commanding one. The store was thrust out from the line of buildings in such a way that it commanded the approaches of the street in both directions. Yet it was long enough so that he could command the rear of the buildings as well by running to the back. The more he studied his position, the more he wondered why Sentinel inhabitants had left the town undefended. Only blind, unreasoning panic could have caused such a flight. At noon, he prepared himself a meal from what he found in the store and waited. It was shortly after high sun when the Indians came. The Indians might have been scouting the place for hours. Finn had not seen them. Now they came cautiously down the street, creeping hesitantly along. From a window that commanded the street, old Finn McGraw waited. On the windowsill he had 4 shotguns, each with 2 barrels loaded with buckshot. And he waited. The Apaches, suspecting a trap, approached cautiously. They peered into empty buildings, flattened their faces against windows, then came on. The looting would follow later. Now the Indians were suspicious, anxious to know if the town was deserted. They crept forward. 6 of them bunched to talk some 40 yards away. Beyond them, a half-dozen more Apaches were scattered in the next 20 yards. Sighting 2 of his shotguns, Finn McGraw rested a hand on each. The guns were carefully held in place by sacks weighing them down, and he was ready. He squeezed all 4 triggers at once. The concussion was terrific. With a frightful roar, the 4 barrels blasted death into the little groups of Indians, and instantly McGraw sprang to the next 2 guns, swung one of them slightly, and fired again. Then he grabbed up a heavy Spencer and began firing as fast as he could aim, getting off 4 shots before the street was empty. Empty, but for the dead. 5 Apaches lay stretched in the street. Another, dragging himself with his hands, was attempting to escape. McGraw lunged to his feet and raced to the back of the building. He caught a glimpse of an Indian and snapped a quick shot. The Apache dropped, stumbled to his feet, then fell again and lay still. That was the beginning. All through the long, hot afternoon, the battle waged. Finn McGraw drank whiskey and swore. He loaded and reloaded his battery of guns. The air in the store was stifling. The heat increased, the store smells thickened, and over it all hung the acrid smell of gunpowder. Apaches came to recover their dead and died beside them. 2 naked warriors tried to cross the rooftops to his building, and he dropped them both. One lay on the blistering roof, the other rolled off and fell heavily. Sweat trickled into McGraw's eyes, and his face became swollen from the kick of the guns. From the front of the store he could watch 3 ways, and a glance down the length of the store allowed him to see a very limited range outside. Occasionally he took a shot from the back window, hoping to keep them guessing. Night came at last, bringing a blessed coolness, and old Finn McGraw relaxed and put aside his guns. Who can say that he knows the soul of the Indian? Who can say what dark superstitions churn inside his skull? For no Apache will fight at night, since he believes the souls of men killed in darkness must forever wander, homeless and alone. Was it fear that prevented an attack now, or was it some fear of this strange, many-weaponed man, if man he was, who occupied the dark stone building? And who can say with what strange expressions they stared at each other, as they heard from their fires outside the town the weird thunder of the old piano in the saloon, and the old man's whiskey bass rolling out the words of the wearing of the green, "Drill, ye terriers, drill. Come where my love lies dreaming in Shenandoah." Day came and found Finn McGraw in the store ready for battle. The old lust for battle, that is the birthright of the Irish, had risen within him. Never from the moment he realized that he was alone in a town about to be raided by Apaches had he given himself a chance for survival. Yet it was the way of the Irish to fight, and the way even of old whiskey-soaked Finn. An hour after dawn, a bullet struck him in the side. He spun half around, fell against the flour barrels, and slid to the floor. Blood flowed from the slash, and he caught up a handful of flour and slapped it against the wound. Promptly he fired a shot from the door, an aimless shot, to let them know he was still there. Then he bandaged his wound. It was a flesh wound, and would have bled badly but for the flour. Sweat trickled into his eyes, grime and powder smoke streaked his face. But he moved and moved again, and his shotguns and rifles stopped every attempt to approach the building. Even looting was at a minimum, for he controlled most of the entrances, and the Apaches soon found they must dispose of their enemy before they could profit from the town. Sometime in the afternoon a bullet knocked him out, cutting a furrow in his scalp, and it was nearing dusk when his eyes opened. His head throbbed with enormous pain. His mouth was dry. He rolled to a sitting position and took a long pull at the Irish, feeling for a shotgun. An Apache was even then fumbling at the door. He steadied the gun against the corner of a box. His eyes blinked. He squeezed off both barrels and hit in the belly. The Apache staggered back. At high noon on the fourth day, Major Magruder with a troop of cavalry rode into the streets of Sentinel. Behind him were 60 men of the town, all armed with rifles. At the edge of town, Major Magruder lifted a hand. Jake Carter and Dennis Magoon moved up beside him. "I thought you said this town was deserted." His extended finger indicated a dead Apache. Their horses walked slowly forward. Another Apache sprawled there dead, and then they found another. Before the store, 4 Apaches lay in a tight cluster. Another savage was stretched at the side of the walk. Windows of the store were shattered and broken. A great hole had been blasted in the door. At the major's order, the troops scattered to search the town. Magruder swung down before the store. "I take an oath nobody was left behind," Carter said. Magruder shoved open the store. The floor inside was littered with blackened cartridges, cases, and strewn with empty bottles. "No one man could fire that many shells or drink that much whiskey," Magruder said positively. He stooped, looking at the floor and some flour on the floor. "Blood," he said. In the saloon they found another empty bottle and an empty box of cigars. Magoon stared dismally at the empty bottle. He had been keeping count, and all but 3 of the bottles of his best Irish glory were gone. Whoever it was, he said sorrowfully, drank up some of the best whiskey ever brewed. Carter looked at the piano. Suddenly he grabbed Magoon's arm. "McGraw!" he yelled. "'Twas Finn McGraw!" They looked at each other. It couldn't be, and yet... Who had seen him? Where was he now? "Who," Magruder asked, "is McGraw?" They explained, and the search continued. Bullets had clipped the corners of buildings. Bullets had smashed water barrels along the street. Windows were broken, and there were 19 dead Indians, but no sign of McGraw. Then a soldier yelled from outside of town, and they went that way and gathered around. Under the edge of a mesquite bush, a shotgun beside him, his new suit torn and bloodstained, they found Finn McGraw. Beside him lay 2 empty bottles of the Irish. Another, partly gone, lay near his hand. A rifle was propped in the fork of the bush, and a pistol had fallen from his holster. There was blood on his side and blood on his head and face. Dead, Carter said. But what a battle. Magruder bent over the old man. Then he looked up, a faint twinkle breaking the gravity of his face. Dead all right, he said. Dead drunk.